for the small minority of non-attendees. There is a button where I can like monitor views. I really should turn that on one day. I just don't like to be that snoopy. I'm like, you do it or you don't, I guess. Like, sucks to be you on test day though, doesn't it? If you show up to class though, wasn't it easy? Am I right? Everybody who's always here at class. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Ooh, ice cold tea. All right. Let's go back to, uh-oh, I lost my page. Let's share screen. We're gonna start back at that great exchange moment that we talked about now 2 lectures ago. So we're back to the moment of the High Renaissance, that 1490 moment. We went through that in Italy, and then we looked at what happened after that with the Mannerist movement and kind of like brought ourselves all the way up to 1600 in the South over the last 2 lectures. Let's rewind back to 1490 and that great exchange, High Renaissance moment, but what's happening in the North. And by the North, I mean like Belgium, Holland, Denmark, England, Germany, pretty much. So everybody's name is Albrecht today. That's not true. We have a couple of Hans and things, but you'll know how to spell Albrecht by the end of the day. Whom you can lovingly refer to in your notes as Al, whatever. All right. The Renaissance. All right, so I kind of point out Germany, just like the South included, you know, Greece and southern Spain and quite a lot going on there, but most of our heavy hitting artists were Italian. You know, you looked at King Ferdinand's royal artist in Prague was Italian, right? Arcimbaldo. You've got Leonardo da Vinci going up to serve for the King of France. So what we got going on in the South was more than just Italy, but it was dominated by Italians. Kind of what we got going on here in the North is more than Germany, but it's dominated by German artists. Hans Holbein is basically the view into the world of the Tudor English court. He was Henry VIII's court artist. He did all those famous portraits of the Tudor monarchs that you recognize as like the picture of Henry VIII and the picture of Elizabeth I. Elizabeth II. She's not dead yet. Anyway, sorry. So once again, it's more than Germany, but it is really dominated by German artists. So let's go back to this great exchange and let's talk about the big deal guy, Albrecht Dürer. You can write his name down. I'll hang out here for a hot minute. We're going to look at a lot of Dürer today. He's a German artist who lived and worked in the Renaissance period. He was born in 1471. So he was a young man at that great exchange. Like, you know, what, college freshman, college sophomore sort of situation. Obviously, school didn't work the same then, but giving you an idea of like a young fellow of about 19. And he lived till 1528. So once again, he fits into that 1490 to 1520 zone of the High Renaissance, where we would consider him very much a High Renaissance figure. He was one of the key artists in the North during this period, not just because he was good or popular, which, I mean, arguably, I guess you could judge for yourselves whether or not he was good. He was very popular. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we have over 1,000 works of art that have survived to this day, 500 years later, by Albrecht Dürer. In comparison, we have less than 24 works by Leonardo da Vinci. So I think it's something like 19 or 20 pieces from Da Vinci, whereas we have over 1,000 from Albrecht Dürer working at the same time. So his work is in part so important because we just have so much of it to be able to study. So he was super popular during his time as well. He was plagiarized tons. Actually, in the Principality of Naples, which, if you're aware, like that's part of what is the modern country of Italy, but was a principality or a duchy during this time, because Italy was made up of a bunch of warring, conflicting independent states. Um, Naples actually issued what we would consider the first copyright law in history to protect Albrecht Dürer's work. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but let's kind of get stuck in here. More is more in this style. I mean, we looked at Jan van Eyck already, and like that dude was mental about detail and fine, tiny work, right? Like he did the portrait of himself as a reflection in that teeny tiny mirror on the back of the wall in the Arnolfini family portrait. Itty bitty, tiny work. So that love of detail and more is more kind of style very much holds strong into the High Northern Renaissance. So we've got Albrecht Dürer, who is kind of one of our students of the Great Exchange. So you remember the Great Exchange was between 1470 and 1490. Oil paint technology and materials started becoming available in Italy. So people could use the same paint as Jan van Eyck had been using for decades, finally in Italy. They could give up tempera, that chalky crap that we give to kids these days, and start using oil paints, which gives so much more possibility for depth and richness of color and fine detail work. In exchange, in the Great Exchange, the North started to study those key illusions of three-dimensional depth that I was kind of hammering on about over the last couple weeks. So we've got that shape, shade, shadow, which started during that early transition, but mastering vanishing point perspective, where you can take the ruler and draw the lines on all those orthogonals to that one dot in the middle of the painting. Foreshortening, which is basically like vanishing point perspective for a single figure, right? And atmospheric perspective. Cloudier, less detailed as they're further away, and also muting the tones of the colors. So those three sort of keys are the South's contribution to the North for mastering that illusion of three-dimensional depth on a canvas. So Dürer actually went to study in Italy with an artist called Bellini, and he came back to Nuremberg in modern-day Germany in 1494. So he kind of came back to Germany and kicked off the High Renaissance in the North after studying the, quote, Italian secrets of three-dimensional illusion in the South. He was a very accomplished woodcut artist, as well as an engraver, as well as a painter. So those three sort of media and techniques are important. What we're looking at right here is a woodcut from 1498. So you've got, what you're seeing here is you carve out the wood where you want white spots, and you leave high points where you want the dark. So it's basically hand carving a stamp. So now look at this with fresh eyes at those itty bitty fine black lines and things. That's actually the freestanding little like hair fine stand-up part of the woodcut block. And then you've got sort of thicker pieces here that hold more ink. Once you look at this, that it's not like a sketch or a drawing, that it's actually a woodcut, it becomes incredible. The amount of detail and control that he has to create this. So we've got Madonna with the monkey, or a monkey. Remember we talked about naturalism kind of weirdly being clunky? where you're just like, yay, garden, really good study of flowers, monkey. That's what we got going on here. Notice how he's chained. He's chained to the board there at his neck. Does he represent like wild nature? Does he represent evil? Monkeys in very early Renaissance images, remember the ones that we looked at. We had that Adoration of the Magi that had those sort of like 3 panels with that 3 arched space. Remember that from our 15th century transition lecture? There were some monkeys thrown in the bushes in there. So they were kind of a go-to for this naturalism movement, certainly in the South in the 15th century. So we got some naturalism going on. We've got great landscape going on, the beauty of nature. Beautiful reflections in the water, especially when you consider the woodcut is the technique here. And as you notice, very nice vanishing point perspective. There is nothing inconsistent about it here. He's mastered it, and he didn't have to have like a lot of buildings around for him to use his ruler to sort of draw pencil lines across to keep it straight. A lot of this is very organic, natural rolling hills, but he's managed to nail the vanishing point perspective like a master. So that's Dürer in 1498 with his woodblock carvings. Meanwhile, his paintings, I mean, we're not here to make fun of a great master, but we got a lot going on here. We're going to look at this one back and forth between this one and the Bellini, which is another Madonna and Child that his sort of protege that he studied under, master, he was the protege? Yes. That he studied under in Italy during the 1490s. Did. So this is basically him sort of copying from memory the same composition, but making it northern. So the fact that it's just a bit clunky in the figures, I don't think was necessarily a lack of skill. I think he was deliberately experimenting with making this piece distinctly northern. So let me just show you the Bellini quick. That is the Italian Renaissance master that he studied under during his time in the South, learning, quote, the secrets. So you've got a very Italian Renaissance beauty here, right? You got that sort of Renaissance baby with the beautiful golden curly hair, not the homunculus thing going on. So lovely Italian lady, blue robes, that clearly looks like an Italian village in the countryside, up in the mountains. Maybe they're in Abruzzo. So this is distinctly Renaissance, but it's also distinctly Italian. So I think Dürer was trying to take the secrets and knowledge that he learned in the South and make something distinctly northern. So you see here, it's almost exactly the same composition. Red, curtain in the background. We've got a window out the back where we see the village, and we've got the Madonna holding the child. So instead, though, we've got much more of a northern looking lass for the Virgin Mary. Very similar poses and color scheme. But, okay, so what's Italian about this? What's sort of what he learned from his teacher? We've got the perspective. We've got vanishing point perspective going on. We've got very complicated poses for the figures, right? We don't just have her sitting in a chair with the baby stiff in her lap. We've kind of gone for, I don't know, like a what's up sort of thing going on for the baby. It's very complicated figure poses. Really rich color scheme, really rich use of reds and blues. So there's some attempt at like anatomy on the baby. And then what isn't Italian? The Madonna's face, I think, is the first thing that strikes me. She is not that sort of oval, small-chinned, Italian, idealistic, stereotypical beauty that we sort of really discussed during the High Renaissance for the South. She still has a long nose and slightly hooded eyes, but rounder cheeks, softer jaw, some more sort of northern beauty attributes. Good German girl. I think you can see in the corner there, she's blonde. So we got a solid like Bavarian milkmaid kind of beauty going on here. Also, I think if you look out the back there, that does not look like Italy. That looks like Germany. So we've sort of moved locales for what's happening out the window. And then on the table, we get this northern tradition of symbolism. So junk on the table means stuff. Represents different things. You see a little coat of arms in each corner. Those are the coats of arms of the donors who commissioned this piece and things. So you've got like little tiny symbolic things going on that are just like pieces on the table. Sorry. So he's taking what he learned in the South, but he's still trying to like experiment on how to make this distinctly northern. I just gave it away. 2 years later, this is his oil painting. Self-portrait. This, I think, also, if you'll notice up in the corner here, that's what his signature looked like. That A with a little D in it, so like that kind of squared off A, D. Why does that say 1504? It's 1500. He bloody wrote it there. Typo on my part. This is 1500. Sorry. Anyway, so 1500, this is clearly oil paint. Do you see how like realistic his skin tone is, how insanely attentive to detail that is? His silky oiled curls, you can see the fur detail on his cloak. You could not achieve this with tempera. You already know that. You probably took a second and a half look at this and went, yeah, oil paints, obviously. So I don't mean to insult your newfound wisdom, but worth pointing out, oils, only way we could have gotten this level of detail. Humanism. Note how this is very much an imitation of Jesus. You know, like every Protestant church has that like kind of ginger brown haired Jesus with the beard like that and the hair like that. Like, doesn't that look a lot like the Jesus from most Protestant churches? It is not a coincidence. Lutheranism and the break from the Vatican was happening, and its hotbed was Germany, which is why Protestant Jesus looks distinctly German. It's from this period of art that we get that sort of identifiable Jesus with his shoulder-length brown hair and his little like goatee thing that we recognize as like the Protestant version of Jesus. Jesus wasn't German ever, but here we go. So he's done a self-portrait of himself very much in the pose of Christ. And this is during that humanism movement of thinking about Christ as a man and his life. This is still probably borderlining on blasphemy to compare oneself to Christ. But God was called a divine artist in that he created all living things on earth. And so art is a reflection of the divine. Remember we talked about Neoplatonism happening in the South? I think this could be kind of considered a cousin of understanding that spark of divinity is what makes people special. And I think that's what he's very borderline scandalously giving us here. All right, so it could be a statement of his godlike status as an artist, or it could just be a statement of piety. I'm not sure if I buy the latter, but that is a legitimate expert opinion on this. Geometric construction, that idea of primary geometric shapes, like we've kind of got this equilateral triangle if we were to follow out his elbows, just like the Mona Lisa, that kind of divine geometry, those sort of perfect equilateral triangles, perfect circles, perfect squares, like primary geometric shapes were still very much a thing in the North as they were in the South. Divine geometry. rational thought. We like these things. So Dürer himself had an awareness of what was happening in Italy from his apprenticeship and his time there as a student. But he also had humanist philosopher associates in Nuremberg. And they would put out like propaganda pamphlets. And the titles of those would kind of have like V-shaped text on them. A little bit like, you know, the opening to every Star Wars movie where you got that sort of like V shape of text. Notice how we have this here with his signature and date and things. He goes into what this piece is about directly as text on the canvas. And the shape of the text in that sort of V shape looks very much like the humanist pamphlets that were being printed in Nuremberg at the time. So that sort of logo style would not have been lost on the people in 1500 during this point. All right. So he was an accomplished oil painter. He was an accomplished woodblock artist. He also did etchings, which is basically you take a piece of metal and you take a tiny brush or stylus and you use acid to draw your image. So anywhere that you let the acid etch deepest, then you pour ink over top of that etching, that piece of metal, and then you kind of like off anything excess with like a squeegee, and then you stamp a piece of paper on it. So the deeper the channel, the more ink that it holds, the darker the color. So you can see here how you can manipulate the acid for how deep the channel is that holds the ink to create beautiful grayscale. Also notice just how freaking detailed this is. So, by the way, he read Vitruvius's On Architecture from 27 BC. And Vitruvius, after we talked about a 1:7 ratio being sort of that classical ideal, and then 1:7.5 was the sort of Renaissance Italian ideal. Well, Vitruvius, who was, I mean, everybody remembers Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. He drew that after reading Vitruvius himself. Vitruvius said 1:8. So that's why you get these like weirdly small-headed people. You'll notice that the Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci is not a 1:8 ratio because Da Vinci realized that like Vitruvius is lying. People are not that pinheaded. But Dürer here did a perfect Vitruvian set of one head, they're 8 heads high. And as you can see, that looks quite a bit strange to us. We are used to that 7.5 or 7 heads proportion. So the head should be bigger for how tall he is. Does that make sense? So the aesthetic proportion of even how to do the perfect human figure in the North was almost a half a head difference than it was in the High Renaissance of the South. So he was very much into rational mathematical thought. Notice how both Adam and Eve are in contrapposto position here. So I would say that his Vitruvian 27 BC 8:1 ratio, ancient Roman philosopher, doing the contrapposto poses, this would be a nod at classicism. So this is a nod of his time as a student in the South. Also, you remember the Apollo Belvedere, that piece that was excavated that then the Italian Renaissance sculptors all kind of copied at least once each. Michelangelo's David is very similar to the Apollo Belvedere. I think I would say that this Adam is looking very similar in sort of pose to the Apollo Belvedere. And it would make sense because Dürer would have been in Rome and studied and probably gone to see it at the museum and done studies of it, just like every good art student would. So he basically like had the same environments and inspirations and visited the same museums as Michelangelo did during the same time. Coming away with it, however, being quite like German about it and trying to make it Northern and specific to sort of his culture. All right, so we got a lot of depth and perspective. We got vanishing point perspective here. But I think the thing that overwhelms is the absurd amount of detail. I mean, you notice that mountain goat up there? Is he a little ram? Itty bitty little guy. So that's kind of the pinnacle of our vanishing point perspective. We've got animals everywhere. So they represent the humors. Everybody's heard of the health issues of you've got like, you know, you're phlegmatic or your humors are imbalanced and that's why you're sick. We can maybe watch an amusing video about that later if you would like. But anyway, the whole idea of like the human body being ruled by 4 humors was still very much part of that. And each of these animals here represents a humor that's the body's balance. Notice here that the cat and the mouse are kind of eyeing each other up. They don't become enemies until after the fall of man. So we got a little foreshadow going on here. So 1504. 1505, he went to Venice. His works were being copied so intensely in Italy that he went to try to stop it. And there were no copyrights at this point. So he did get the Venetians to agree that they could copy his art, but they could not sign it with his name. So he wrote that his status as an artist was much higher in Italy than in Germany. So his joke was like, he's kind of a mediocre, okay artist to his fellow Germans, but like he was all the rage in Italy. So you can see here, Albrecht Dürer, Horicus Faciebat. You learned Faciebat means made, because you remember the Pietà, Michelangelo Buonarroti Faciebat is literally the type for Michelangelo Buonarroti made this right across the Virgin Mary. So there, we've got it here, and the year 1504. So they could copy his Adam and Eve if they could get a copy of, because again, with these etches and the wood blocks, you can make several copies of each piece of art. You can just keep putting ink and laying paper on this, not forever, because every time you rub the ink on, ink is a little bit acidic, so it will start to break down the image, which is why which number in a run you get is important, because this is all going to just get like sloppier the more copies get made off of that one etching. So the Italians could copy his etchings if they got a copy of one and could like make a new one, but they were not allowed to copy his signature plates. So it's quite interesting that he got that sort of status at that point. All right, let me just flip to the Apollo Belvedere. Remember him? Remember that? It's all coming back to you now. Now, I think, you know, you can kind of see that in our Adam here.
And you said this one was made on metal?
Yep.
You said that one was made on metal? Like this is a metal piece of art?
Yep, this is an acid etched piece of metal that was then stamped to make these paper etchings. So yeah, he's a master of many media and techniques. All right, so let's go back to his oil painting, because he starts doing some compositions that you can see like kind of look like Italian, but then there's some serious differences that make them distinctly Northern. Dürer, Adoration of the Trinity. Looks like he studied the Raphaels at the Vatican, am I right? He sure did is the answer. So this one's in 1511. We've got perfect vertical symmetry of composition. Remember, you can like kind of draw that line vertically top to bottom and split the piece in 2 left and right halves, and you've got balance, left, right, everything's about samey. We got 2 levels of saints. Notice how we've got the Pope here, the Bishop of Rome, if you will. So we got like the Pope, probably some kings, various important living people at the time of this painting, And then you got the saints up here in like the middle row. And then you have Christ, and then you have God, and then you have the angels, and then the dove. And then, self-important monkey that he was, the last man standing on earth is in fact our self-portrait of young Albrecht Dürer. So he's down here holding the sign, letting you know what's happening, and he's like last man standing. Anyway, so the Holy Trinity in the center, Father, Son, Holy Spirit is the dove. Very bright colors used, right? We've got this fantastic bright palette. It's rich like High Renaissance, but I feel like it's even brighter than what the Italians would have thought was toward in 1511. Notice how everybody is floating above the landscape, that the earth is left empty of human souls except for Albrecht Dürer. There's definitely an influence of the Italian Renaissance here. I think there's definitely an influence of Raphael in particular. But you see that there's those multi-layers of vanishing point perspectives that get kind of like the dot. There you can see the vanishing point perspective on Earth is the dot there. And then he would have done it directly above it to do a secondary vanishing point dot there. We'd have gotten another one there. You can see that we're moving towards. So all of the vanishing point perspectives are stacked on top of each other for each of the sort of levels that we're looking at. He learned that trick in Italy. He also probably studied those Raphaels that are at the Vatican. So we've got 2 points, one above the other, and then a third one sort of implied above that. This is a very complicated composition, and it borrows exactly from the playbook of Raphael. What makes it a bit distinctly northern is the style of the faces, the style of the gowns and dresses, and I don't know, the ethnicity of the people. We've gone for, again, that longer, like 8-head elongated body, or I mean, if you'd rather think of it like the tiny head in proportion to the body, which again is more of the northern flair to have the smaller head in proportion to the body. And then, of course, we've got this sign down here explaining everything in Latin, which the Italians didn't do. They didn't like paint signage into their pieces like Dürer and several other of the northerns. So I think you can see, like, wow, he certainly studied Raphael, but this is no Raphael, right? Like, you can just tell by the style of the characters, and even though the composition is almost exactly copied from Raphael, the artistic flair is very different. All right, let's get back to portraits. Once again, Albrecht Dürer. Bright colors, no foreground or background. You see symbolism here. So the pomegranate. Anybody know the Greek myth of Persephone in the underworld? Real briefly, Hades, god of hell, really fancied Artemis's daughter, or Diana, depending on if you're Greek or Roman. So he kidnapped her, as one does in ancient mythology, and she didn't want to be there. So her mother got really mad and made winter happen. And then when Hermes finally sort of fessed up that last time he was down in the underworld, he saw Persephone with Hades. Zeus went down to be like, hey, you got to give her back to her mom. But did she eat anything while she was down there? And it was that she had like 6 pomegranate arils, which are the little seeds inside, which is not much to eat. But so for each thing that she ate while in the underworld, she had to spend a month with Hades each year. So that's why we have winter, is because Persephone has to leave the earth and go rule over the underworld with Hades because she ate that pomegranate. So the sort of eating of, or a partially eaten pomegranate is kind of shorthand for that classical Greek myth to symbolize death, or the underworld. So holding a pomegranate that's whole is kind of recognizing one's own mortality, but having it open like it is for Maximilian here is like shorthand that this was written after he died. So this is a posthumous piece where he's dead. He done gone eaten the pomegranate. He's in the underworld. So a little bit of shorthand symbolism. That's a little nod to classicism that Durer brings to the North. I kind of want you to take a moment with this, and we've already looked at mannerism. And one of the key points about mannerism was just like the weird choices of color. And I feel like this portrait of Emperor Maximilian is breaking enough of the High Renaissance rules here in 1519 that it kind of counts as rather mannerist in aesthetic. I mean, look at that, like bilious, like, I don't know, it's not pea green, it's like bottle glass green, which is an odd choice for a background. Very, very bright colors on the robes. We've got no foreground, no background, no attempt at perspective, no giving us any sort of context for this person. It doesn't feel very like High Renaissance. It feels very sort of that edge of starting to manipulate the rules of the High Renaissance. Notice how he also wrote the eulogy directly on the painting. Again, Durer, he loves to just like write words in Latin on his paintings. It's kind of a dead giveaway that it's a Durer. So I think this change in style very much reminds you of mannerism. It's very much a change in the rules, but the North didn't have that same like pendulum swing, awkward teen rejection of High Renaissance. It just kind of like borrowed what it wanted from the High Renaissance and broke those rules when it suited them the whole time anyway. So Durer just kind of being like, I don't want to do perspective, and I'm going to choose this like god-awful bilgewater green. I don't know, it's very northern that he's not trying to necessarily say something edgy, but he's breaking with style conformities of the High Renaissance. You've got the emperor's crest up here, and you've got his eulogy with the dates and the years and the stuff. And so no secret that it's Emperor Maximilian and he dead. So thanks, Durer, for not just signing everything, but literally giving us a little essay on what the hell the painting's about every time. All right, I think that's enough Durer for a minute. Let's go to our other favorite, Albrecht, of the same decades. Albrecht Altdorfer. He is kind of he's a different kind of edgy German High Renaissance guy. For as much as Durer was a humanist, I think Altdorfer was more a romantic in that sense that he sort of looked at art in that fantastic sort of setting. He wasn't interested in giving you a carbon copy of real experienced life. There's nothing humanist about Albrecht Altdorfer's work. This right here, you can see, is Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was a penitent who went to live alone in the woods and beat himself with rocks to sort of beat the sins out of himself. So that's him bashing his chest with a rock. We've got a very Northern European, Bavarian forest kind of nature scene going on here. Naturalism and the beauty of nature, even if it's not even realistic, but like the magic of magical nature is very Altdorfer. I think he does a great job in creating a mood. Like there's something sort of like misty and Narnia and just fantastical about this monastery setting that he's put St. Jerome in. Another interesting aspect of this Altdorfer piece is it is a diptych. Everybody remembers die, two, ptych panels. So diptych is two panels that you close on each other. I'm sorry we're not meeting in real life. I have some diptychs from, because they're still all the rage in Greek Orthodox worship. So pass around a diptych and a triptych, where you've got these like personal little folding things where there's a piece of art on the outside, and that's sort of like what the public gets to see. That might even be like how you have it like up on a shelf or hanging on a wall in your home. And then your personal worship, you would open the diptych like you would open like a little 2-page book, basically. And the inside panels are like your personal secret art. They are for your intimate, one-person viewing, reflective prayer and thought. So this piece here is an 8x13. So like a standard piece of printer paper is 8.5 by 11. So this is about the size of like printer paper, a little bit taller. So art has moved from sort of only architecture and only like huge books when we started at the beginning of the semester, to having sort of private art, as we've seen with these commissioned portraits, but that's still for the very, very wealthy. And that's still not private, right? That's still kind of your public image. That's your official image or likeness. This piece by Altdorfer is very special because it represents this movement in portable personal art. So you've got this sheet of paper size, really small painting that closes so that it's not just always on display. It could be carried around, and it could be open for contemplation or prayer. It's a big change from the previous ideas of the function of art. So this is definitely for prayer and contemplation and sort of personal holy journey. So that is part of what makes it very special to represent this sort of change in what art even is. He didn't just do itty bitty pieces. We have this great piece. I think on first glance, I hate to like tell you what you're looking at, but to me, okay, this is oil paint on parchment, which you remember is skin, like sheep or goat skin, glued to wood. So this is painted on stretched skin that was glued to wood. And it's amazing that it has survived as long as it has, with all of those organic components that should have rotted away. Without looking at the title, even though you already have, it looks like a landscape, right? It's just kind of this very moody fairy tale feel landscape setting, nature setting. And then you St. George. Everybody knows St. George is the patron saint of England who slays the dragon, right? We've looked at a couple of St. George and the Dragon so far, and they're usually quite dramatic, like on his white horse stabbing a mighty massive dragon. You have to look like for a couple seconds to sort of be like, oh, yep, there's a horse in the meadow. Oh, there's a rider on that horse. Oh, there's a weird frog snake thing down. Oh, I guess that's a dragon. Note how St. Jerome is accompanied by a lion. Doesn't look like a lion. It looks like that thing from Neverending Story, but, you know, I digress. That's Altdorfer's dragon. Not the sort of winged fire dragon that we're used to, but more of like a slimy amphibious giant of some variety. So this is, I think, a great change in that it is supposed to be this religious narrative of St. George, but the focus is really the landscape, the mood that it's setting, the feelings that it's evoking. This was called the Danube School of Landscape, which Danube is in the Danube River in France and Germany. So you kind of do a historic figure or a religious figure, but the balance of attention is shifting to the landscape. It's more trying to convey mood and meaning through the landscape. So the level of detail in this landscape also is incredibly overwhelming. I mean, you look at how many of those individual leaves on all of the trees and shrubs are perfectly painted and shaded and shadowed, like hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. There's just a stupid amount of detail. So it's very difficult for your eye to read this. Am I right? Like usually with a high Renaissance piece, you're like, okay, focal point, pretty lady, dead center, boom. And then people are pointing or gesturing and it makes a primary geometric shape. Very easy to sort of read a high Renaissance Southern Italian piece very quickly, right? This one, it took some work, didn't it? You're sort of trying to like literally dig your way through this forest of foliage and things, and then you find these teeny tiny characters down there and you're like, oh, well, I guess it is the story of St. George and the Dragon. How about that? It's not meant to sort of be quickly scanned and read and translated. It's meant to sort of be wandered through a bit like the landscape itself. It takes some practice to read these Northern Renaissance pieces from Germany. But you just sort of let your eye wander through the detail and then find the sort of odd bits and decode the story. They don't happen fast like they do in the South. All right, one more Altdorfer for your enjoyment, which again, I think this one and Dürer's this one, I think you can see the Southern influence that like, okay, we studied Italy, but like we're doing our own thing. So we have this imaginatory point of view, right? We're like very much like hovering above the scene. We're either on a high point above the army or we're also hovering because we've got this winged the middle. So maybe we also are floating. I don't know, but things are not realistic just from the very beginning when you're looking at this from a point of view. You've got a bird's eye point of view, but almost like as artificial of a bird's eye point of view as possible. To me, this looks like a scene from a video game or something, right? It does not feel 1529. So this is a landscape scene with historic figures rather than historic figures in a landscape. You know what I'm saying? Like this is much more attention to the landscape and the mood and the dynamics of that landscape. And it's also telling a historic story, but I feel like that's very secondary. So we've got ourselves hovering over the battlefield. You've got that sort of curved line of the Earth's surface there in the back. So the cartouche plaque hanging in the air has an inscription about Alexander the Great's victory. The Battle of Isis, yes, there was an Isis 500 years ago as well, spelt slightly different, but it was a Islamic state that Alexander was battling. So God is represented by the sun that you can see sort of rising over here. Isis / the Islamic State is still the crescent moon, as it still is often represented now. So that's kind of the turn of events that we're seeing represented by that. So the tools of naturalism and landscape and vanishing point perspective and atmospheric perspective are all used to convey ideas, but they're heightened. This is not naturalism. This is not realism. There's no place on earth that looks like this. I think we're a little desensitized that like we've got like magical video game realms that look like this. But 500 years ago, this would have been quite a magnificent thing to come out of some dude's imagination. So it heightens. It's more emotional. It's more expressive than just like a photo documentation of what an army looks like on a hill. So this is not seeking the illusion of naturalism, but it's creating this sort of believable imaginary landscape. Does that make sense? I mean, are you getting your eye in for what the North is doing different during this time? I hope so. So those were our Albrechts. Let's look at Hans Holbein and the English for a minute. I think you recognize this guy. So German artist, worked for many, many years in England, got himself in big trouble because he made Anne of Cleves. I don't have a picture of her. Everybody know this story? I got 30 emails. All right.
I swear he was holding a drum
Holbein.
in the last picture I saw of that painting.
All right, so we've got, not that one. This is Holbein's Anne of Cleves. So as you know, there weren't pictures or FaceTime or whatever during pre-modern era. So what people did was have portraits commissioned of potential brides. So you'd send a portrait, and if you're Henry VIII, because you are on to your fourth wife and you're just like not having any of this, like, I don't know, whatever, he sent his royal court artist, Hans Holbein, to paint Anne of Cleves himself so that he got kind of a genuine image of her. So this is Holbein's Anne of Cleves. I mean, you can see that she like likely has kind of a soft nose going on there, but there's nothing like wildly unattractive about her. But he got her, he got her in real life. I think they just sort of like didn't get along from when they met, but he decided that she was like the ugliest woman ever, and Holbein was in tons of trouble for painting this image and, quote, lying to his king. So he called her the Flanders mare. So that was his nickname for this wife. He ended up getting a divorce from her, which she was also fine with because he was kind of a dick. So she survived him. Good for her. But that's just kind of a Holbein moment, quite famously. So here's Henry VIII by Holbein, and Henry would have approved of this, which means that Holbein was being kind in a lot of ways, I'm sure. We've got humanism going on in its own special way here. I mean, you saw the portrait of Emperor Maximilian by Dürer. So we've got kind of humanism to the next level in England. Henry wanted a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, because Anne Boleyn was his hot new mistress, who I'm pretty sure wasn't going to sleep with him until he married her, so he changed the state religion. So the Pope would not give him a divorce from Catherine of Aragon because she was like one of the major princesses of Spain, and Spain is quite a powerful enemy for the Pope to have. So he was like, nope, sorry. So Henry VIII started an entire new religion that he forced on the entire nation of England, now called the Church of England. And that's kind of like ultimate humanism, where it's not just like one individual life's experience is important. It's like, no, one specific human individual experience is the most important, and that one person is just Henry VIII. So religious persecutions happened, murders, dissolution of monasteries, terrible things happened. Everybody had to convert to a new religion in the country because the king wanted a divorce. So as you know from seeing Dürer's stuff here, humanism, you know Martin Luther was doing his business in Germany. It makes sense that some German Lutheran Protestant infiltration then happened in England, because they now became sort of Protestant brothers in arms. So Hans Holbein would have felt, comfortable in Henry VIII's court because it was now Protestant. Church of England was different from Lutherans because Henry VIII was the head of the church. Convenient. But it was drafted as a religious doctrine, very much copy and pasted with minor adjustments from the Lutheran canon. So Martin Luther's 95 Theses was 1517. So this painting here is a mere 22 years later. So Germans flooded into England to assist with the Reformation, and distance themselves from the Catholic Church and create sort of a legitimate Protestant movement. Teach them how to be Protestants, right? Everybody knows that Henry VIII had 6 wives, right? There's a great children's song that we learn in England that I should have queued up. I'm not sure if it will be available here. But it's 3 minutes and you'll never forget the order of them again. Henry VIII song. Oops, nope. Nope. I tell you, there's some really good ones, but 2 minutes.
Terrible Judas. Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. I'm Henry VIII, I had 6 sorry wives. Some might say I ruined their lives. Catherine of Aragon was one. She failed to give me a son. I had to ask her for a divorce. That broke up her heart, of course. Young Anne Boleyn, she was 2. Had a daughter, the best she could do. I said she flirted with some other man, and off with the chop went dear Anne. Lovely Jane Seymour was 3, the love of a lifetime for me. She gave me a son, little Prince Ed. Then poor old Jane went and dropped dead. Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. I'm Henry VIII, I had 6 sorry wives. Some might say I ruined their lives. Anne of Cleves came at 4. I fell for the portrait I saw, then laid eyes on her face and cried, she's a horse. I must have another divorce. Catherine Howard was 5, a child of 19, so alive. She flirted with others, no way to behave. The axe sent young Kath to her grave. Catherine Parr, she was lost. By then all my best days were past. I lay on my deathbed, age just 55. Lucky Catherine, the last, stayed alive. I mean, how unfair. Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. I'm Henry VIII, I had 6 sorry wives. You could say I ruined their lives. Exciting news! Henry VIII is looking for a new wife. Oh no. What did I say?
High quality entertainment. So basically, I mean, having to keep that stuff sorted isn't, I guess, super necessary, but sort of recognizing the implications of all of that, especially when he's got 3 Catherines, 2 Annes, and a Jane for you to like keep straight. Catherine of Aragon was the Spanish princess. She was the important one. She was married to his brother, and then his brother died. So instead of losing the Spanish support, Henry, the younger brother, married her and then became king. They were married for like almost 20 years. And so Mary, the first successor, was Catherine of Aragon's. Anne Boleyn had Elizabeth, and then Jane Seymour had Edward. And the last 3 wives didn't get a chance because Anne of Cleves was divorced quite quickly after a few months because he wanted the dowry from her family in Flanders. So he took the money and then he divorced her and gave her an estate in the countryside. And she's like, fine, cool. I think you're also kind of an asshole. So great. And then they ended up being like quite good friends in their sort of middle-aged and older years. Then he married a teenager who may or may not have slept around on him, so he chopped off her head. And then he married Catherine Parr. So he had no more children after Jane. Edward really screwed up that whole Protestant versus Catholic thing, and he's the one who made the decree that no Catholic could ever sit on the English throne again, which is why the English throne is now occupied by Germans, because we ran out of English Protestants at one point, very shortly after the end of the Tudors. But Edward died as a teenager. Mary took over, had her sister thrown in the tower and exiled and blah, 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 made illegitimate. And then Mary died, so Queen Elizabeth I took over. And after all of that, she reigned for 60 years, and it was sort of known as the Golden Age of England. Was the daughter he had from the wife that he cut her head off after 3 years of marriage, after changing the entire nation's religion to marry her in the first place. So very turbulent times. But how is that for like an ultimate example of humanism? Like, my human and earthly experience in this one lifetime is more important than any other consequences ever, including my afterlife and the spiritual afterlife of every single person in my country. Like, that is ultimate humanism. And that's what we got going on in England during the Tudor period. So Hans Holbein is sort of the photojournalist, if you will, of this period. He's our portrait artist of the English monarchy. He became the official royal artist in 1535. He had to design jewelry. He had to design architecture. He designed a couple of the palaces in England. He had to do portraits. He had to organize theater events and plays, jousting tournaments. He pretty much had to do anything that the king wanted. And it was his social obligation to like attend parties and dinners and be charming. And it sounds like a bloody exhausting job. But Hans was a German, and he was very much in the Northern Renaissance style. The devil is in the details, and he is a classic Northern Renaissance artist. If you look at the detail of the clothing in Holbein paintings, it's shocking how he, like, if you got to see this in real life, you could see the cording of the gold threads and which way the threading is actually turned on them, because he paints that much detail. In the Crown Jewels, which I'm not sure if everybody knows their English history too terribly well, but Cromwell had the dissolution of the English monarchy. He chopped off Charles I's head. The English Restoration then happened in 1666, but that's an important year because all of the English crown jewels got lost, sold, melted down, missing, stolen, whatever, during that dissolution of the monarchy. So all of these paintings we have pre-1666, they sort of show us what were original English crown jewels. And Holbein painted to such a detailed degree that they can actually identify individual gemstones based on the flaws and details that he puts in about their cuts in the portraits. They can trace those gemstones into what is currently or previously set in crowns. Like one of the major English crown jewels is set in the royal queen's crown of France now. So there's like no chance in getting that back. But they can sort of prove that that stone was part of the English crown jewels based on Holbein's artwork. So yeah, Northern Renaissance detail. Right, so once again, we are not in the Italian Renaissance style of, you know, giving context to space. There's no foreground, there's no background, there's no sense of space, there's just Henry and some writing on the canvas telling you that it is in fact Henry and that the year is 1539. We've got this straight on pose. I think that might maybe remind you of Durer's self-portrait. I mean, not 100% because this is clearly a king, but that sort of humanistic, straight on, staring right at the viewer, breaking that fourth wall kind of pose. Kind of reeks of Northern humanism. Next is my favorite of the Holbeins. All right, everybody's on a laptop right now, or they're on a computer that they can move and or get your butt up off your chair and move. I want you to either turn your computer so that you're looking at this image from the far right side of the screen. Like go to the right side of your computer and like peek at this from a really oblique angle. Just basically move your body so that you can see that skull in perfect three-dimensional proportion. You got it? Are you freaked out about like how weird and cool and futuristic and nah man, you totally have to have photoshopped that in there? That's crazy is going on? Yeah. No, that's original to it. That is not a later Photoshop edition. So that very much is a huge clue to you what your point of view should be for this painting. It is very large, but you know that when it's hung, you should be able to meet the gaze of both of those ambassadors. And when you're standing at the side of the painting, you should be looking down at that sort of extreme angle to see that skull in perfect proportion. So there's sort of that exact height that is necessary for the point of view for this piece. So you can see you're looking up to meet the gaze of the two ambassadors, but you definitely need to be looking down to meet that skull from the corner of the piece. So I love this crazy piece. It shows Holbein's imagination and symbolism, but also his like mental mastery of detail. All right, so let's get into this for a minute. Colors, very bright colors used. We got some tertiaries, very rich. You know, we've got these like weird greens and weird sort of coral salmon satin that the Spanish ambassador is wearing. P.S. If you want to tell the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant during this period's art, the Catholics are wearing the fancy outfits. The Protestants are dressed in all black or all brown. They're usually wearing very expensive things like that entire floor-length fur coat he's got, but he's dressed without any bling because that's very Protestant to be sort of like humble and cover your head and dress modestly and without sort of overt signs of earthly whatever, whereas Catholics are like, bring on the gold. So the guy in the shiny salmon satin outfit with the like huge dangling bling necklace and the big fluffy fur, he's the Catholic, obviously. And then you got the like morose guy in a very expensive but all brown suit over there. That's the Protestant. So blingy dress dudes, Catholics. So symbolism. Let us get into this. I mean, quickly, I do want to say the bright tertiary colors because I realize I got distracted, which happens a lot. Weird color choices, right? It might remind you of those sort of like weird salmon and pastel corals used in the Mannerist paintings, kind of that weird bottle green color for the curtain in the back. Odd choices, but they don't necessarily mean mannerism here. It's just the North where we're not following those sort of rigid rules of the mastery of the High Renaissance. We're just kind of like doing our thing. So symbolism. I mean, yes, there's a giant like wacky Morphous skull on the floor, but we'll get to that in a minute. So they're standing in front of a shelf. We've got the top shelf being objects representing the celestial spheres of the heavens, and the bottom shelf a terrestrial. Do you see the crucifix peeking out of the extreme top left corner of the curtain, right at the edge? God's always watching. Jesus sees you even when you think you're alone. The lute on the bottom shelf, that sort of like janky looking guitar thing is called a lute. It has a broken string. So that's his double symbol of discord. So you got the Catholic dude on the left, the Protestant dude on the right. You got a broken string on the instrument as a symbol of discord, disharmony. There's a hymnal open on that bottom shelf, and it is so detailed that you can actually read it if you're up close to this painting. It is open to two Catholic hymns that are in the Protestant hymnal. And this book was a known book that has sort of like one arrangement. And these two pages are not side by side. So he artificially opened it to two separate pages in a Protestant hymnal that are also Catholic hymns. So this is him deliberately making a message of, hey, we sing the same songs in church, we worship the same God, we take the same communion. We got a lot of similarities going on. So those are kind of two great ones down there. So if we can solve our problems on the terrestrial, sort of like earthly mortal plane, which is represented by the bottom shelf, then surely all of our heavenly issues will get sorted as well. So the wildly distorted perspective skull tells us a couple things. For one, it tells you that he definitely had projection technology, am I right? He was able to either take an actual human skull or he drew a human skull and then he projected it at that extreme angle onto the canvas to be able to trace it out to get that illusion. Because it is, you know, if you look at it straight on, it's just like a weird floating disc. But if you manage to stand next to the paint, did everybody like pick up their computer or walk around and waggle it until they got the right? You almost have to be looking at it like completely from the side. But when you do, you will get it lined up perfectly. So that's a picture of, like, that's a photograph of the painting from the extreme angle of the corner. You can see how extreme that angle is with the flooring there. So if you stand next to the canvas with your eyes like eye to eye with the men, you look down and see this skull. And again, Northerners, they love their symbolism. This is known as a memento mori, which is just Latin for remember you die. So these were very popular at that time. It was kind of a humanist view on the brevity and importance of our earthly lives. Literally that whole life's too short idea wrapped up into just the image of a skull. So life's too short for discord. Why don't we resolve our problems? Can't we all just get along, man? So we've got discords between the two ambassadors, obviously, but also they are representing that greater Catholic Protestant conflict. It's kind of foreboding to the centuries of ugly conflict when human life is so brief. So we're not looking directly at the length of eternity in heaven, but rather focusing on how short our lives on earth are. And that's kind of that important humanist aspect of the memento mori, or that idea of a we got Willie Shakes here. William Shakespeare, he's got our most famous memento mori in art. Remember in Hamlet when he holds up the skull that gets like knocked out of the grave when they are digging a new grave in the old cemetery, which by the way is super common. So picking it up and going, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well. That's like super famous scene that everybody likes to recreate. That was just a sort of dramatic scene of a memento mori, right? Or that we all die by just literally gazing into the lifeless skull of someone else. Popular pastime during this period. So, right, William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. I just wanted to point out that William Shakespeare is a Renaissance man. Not in that sense that we call anybody who's good at more than one thing a Renaissance man, but like actually lived in the time of the Renaissance. English as a language, we kind of haven't talked about this since Chaucer, but we got that Middle English is what Chaucer is writing in. Now we're in this time of the great vowel shift where Shakespeare is writing in what is now called early modern English. So he's not writing in Middle English or Old English, and that's one like pet peeve of many a English professor. So don't say that Shakespeare wrote in Middle English or Old English, because he wrote in early modern English. And that's why, even though it's a pain in the butt to try to read, you can still absolutely understand it. And when you hear it, it sounds like possibly a funny accent, but you can completely understand it. Chaucer, even hearing it out loud is a struggle because the pronunciation of the vowels and things were still completely different. Spelling was different. Vocabulary was still sort of developing for what English would become. So by the time we get Shakespeare, he is the first major English-speaking writer to write in early modern English. So that sort of most recognizable early modern version of English. People say he is the greatest writer in the history of the English language. I'm not here to confirm or deny that. I just need you to understand that he's part of this era that we're studying to keep the rest of that in context. Queen Elizabeth I would have gone to see some of his plays. Probably not at his theater, but there is a great pub in London that called the George, and it has these like balconies in it and then a big courtyard in the middle, and they perform plays and acrobatics and all kinds of things there, and Shakespeare almost certainly performed some pieces for Elizabeth at that pub as sort of a private engagement. Whether or not she attended anything at the Globe Theater, we're going to go with probably not, because going to the theater was not a fancy person thing to do. Going to the theater was kind of a masses thing to do. So kind of the opposite of what we think of going to the theater now. Think about going to the movies. That's like a everyman popular pastime versus like going to see Shakespeare. So Shakespeare then was what the like Cinemax is now, right? Isn't that what you call a large theater of movie places? Yeah, anyway. All right, so he falls after the High Renaissance in Italy, which you remember ended in 1520. But in the North, there's not that sort of final reactionary counter movement thing. So not to say that like mannerism ideas didn't bleed into the North, because again, nothing is as clean and shiny as we would like to call it in a textbook. But in general, the High Renaissance of the North, or the Northern Renaissance, lasts all the way from 1490 to 1600. They just like truck on with just what we would call the Renaissance. Like they didn't have like a major rejection reaction sort of thing happen like the Mannerist movement did in the South. So we just keep on trucking with no major upheavals because we're already just eccentric enough, if that makes sense. So in your book, we'll talk about that in a minute, but there's some stuff on Shakespeare. And I think you need to pick one that you like and take notes on it. Oh my gosh, stuff to look for in poetry handout. I might have to do like a small break to find that for you. So let's see. I'm going to highly recommend you do this part of the readings in preparation for the final exam. Pay extra special attention to the what's your favorite color Shakespeare. Okay, so I think we can end that. I lost how to, there we go. Stop. We can end that there. Let me look for your how to see. That's not it. Art toolkit, Caravaggio, Everyman, Gothic style, how to see. So much in here. Do you have many things I have labeled stuff? Unacceptable. Here we go. Duh. All right. So it's my how to see lecture in a humanities class. So I will post this for you for your ease so that you don't have to copy down these bullet points once again. Let me see, how do I, let's get back to sharing. I will post this for you 100% in the, is it sharing yet? No. Oh, I just confused it. Uh-oh. Okay. So how to see. We have already looked at stuff to look for in a painting, but I think probably when you're trying to do critiques and things, this might be a handy resource to have again. Remember, you don't have to talk about all of these things because a lot of times there isn't enough interesting things to talk about in every single piece. But these are just the reminders of that checklist of like color, lighting, texture, line, how's the space used? So that's your chance to talk about the illusion of three-dimensional. Like what do we have going on for interactions? Focal point of view, viewers, relationship stuff. Balance, repetition, proportion, depth, theatrical or passive, energetic, static kind of thing. Right, so stuff to look for in poetry. Poetry is meant to be read aloud. So sadly, things like Shakespeare meant to be read aloud. Basic content, like what is it actually about, is a good one. So like maybe first round, what is it about? Second round, read it out loud for like what do the words actually sound like? Do they rhyme? Do they have like a good-dunk, good-dunk, good-dunk sort of pattern to them? And then look at like who's talking. Is there some sort of like omnipotent godlike narrator? Are two people having a dialogue? Is somebody just like talking at you? Who's the intended audience? Sometimes that's a little harder to discern than others. Sometimes that's very Googleable, but oftentimes you can make a good stab at who the intended audience was based on the content, right? Comparison is always an important thing to look at. I guess anybody who took English with me, like my favorite sonnet, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. So, you know, if snow be white, then her breast be done. So those comparisons, like one thing compared to another, what are you doing when you're like, your lips are like red, red roses? Like, what are you doing? So being able to sort of recognize when you're being told a metaphor or a simile and what that's doing. Choice of images, like I'm saying that some ladies' boobs look like leather saddlebags, like that's an image instead of milky white or snow, freshly fallen snow. So the sort of choice of image that you're making as something develops is good to note. Are there patterns of rhyming? Is there a pattern to the rhythm? Shakespeare, you know, iambic pentameter and all that. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Right, personification of non-human things. Are we saying that something else like has meaning or action or agency? So relevance. Do you get it? Like, do you empathize? Do you relate? You know, usually love poems, we all either can go like, dude, wake up, or like sing it, right? You can kind of have those moments of whether or not you're kind of relating to what's conveyed. Also with poetry, especially when you're reading something like Shakespeare, it feels elevated now because we make you read it. But there's a lot of like fart and poop and sex jokes in Shakespeare, and they are very lowbrow and they are not fancy. So sort of recognizing when there's that very informal moment. Tone. Is it serious? Is it funny? Like a limerick, like There Once Was a Girl from Nantucket. Those are not serious or dignified, right? Pacing. Again, you have to read it out loud to see how fast or slow you have to read it in order to read it. Remember, we talked about that with Chaucer. When you use certain words, you have to sort of slow down your cadence. So like alliteration and assonance. So like she sells seashells down by the seashore. The whole point of a tongue twister is you cannot say it fast. So if you want to say it properly, you have to slow down. So there's ways of sort of making you read certainly out loud at a certain pace. So the poem is making you do that. So I will clearly post this for you in this week's folder. We will get to music later. By later, I guess we've only got 2 lectures left before this. I'll figure it out because it's part of my like obligation. I usually make you do like church music during the Gothic period, but I just didn't feel like it this semester, if I'm honest. So maybe we'll do that for 20 minutes next time. Probably not next time though, probably Monday. So one last thing, I want to have a quick reading of Shakespeare like we read Chaucer by the best early modern English, let's see, there we go, scholar that we have. I think, I don't know, whatever. What am I going to say? So I'm going to bring this up. The Crystals, they do a great job on sort of the actual linguistics of English. And there have been some interesting things that they have worked on for actually performing Shakespeare in the original English rather than, you know, modern British, because we think that it's supposed to sound like regal and fancy, and that's just not how people spoke during Shakespeare's time. So let's just have a quick listen.
The Globe Theatre, which opened in 1994, very near to its former site, specialises in original productions of Shakespeare. But it wasn't until 2004 that a play was performed in the original pronunciation, known as OP.
Well, the Globe is known for its original practices. This is why it is here, to try and recreate the theatre as it was in 1600 and thereabouts. And when they started it off, they decided to do original costume, original music with original instruments, original movement around the stage and so on. But they never did original pronunciation because they thought, quite wrongly, but understandably, they thought nobody would understand it. But it was a very, very successful occasion. The seats were packed for that weekend. Everybody loved it. And it was such a success that the Globe then decided to do a second production the following year, production of Troilus and Cressida.
It transports you back through the centuries. It's a very magical, almost hair-raising experience, especially in this space, to hear that accent, a space that's sort of as close as we can get to a 400-year-old theatre, and then an accent that's as close as we can get to a 400-year-old accent with a 400-year-old play. If anything, it rounds the experience of going to see a Shakespeare play out. David and Ben have also discovered that nearly 2/3 of Shakespeare's sonnets have rhymes that don't work in modern English, but do work in OP.
Give us a good one. 116?
I think, 116 is interesting because lots of people have it at their weddings and they think of it as being a very sort of, highfalutin sonnet. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments, but it completely changes in OP, particularly because of the rhymes. Love's not time's fault, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and wakes, but bears it out e'en to the edge of dumb. If this be error and upon me proved, I never read, nor no man ever loved.
Yeah, proved and loved. I mean, it's a lovely ending, isn't it? Proved and loved, it really doesn't work.
Completely falters. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. There's something about working our way back to Shakespeare rather than dragging him into the 21st century. If you can sort of imagine that there's that extra dimension when you're working in a space like this, you get a similar sort of extra dimension when you use Shakespeare's accent.
I'm not going to make you listen to Ben Crystal read in original pronunciation for an hour. He's wearing what?
We're about to see Queen Elizabeth I, Shakespeare's queen, and Queen Elizabeth II, our queen, meet together for the first time. Did you know that some words were pronounced differently in Shakespeare's day than they are today? So there are some words that Shakespeare's queen pronounces differently
Can
from
you still
our
see
queen,
this?
but they both believe they speak the best Queen's English. Let's see how they get on.
Yeah, we can.
Awesome.
Enchanted to meet you.
Enchanted.
Oh, that was very gracious of you.
That should be gracious.
I must say, you do speak in a very funny way.
Your pronunciations make me laugh.
Do you mean laugh?
Yes, laugh.
I hope we'll understand each other.
I hope so too. Let me tell you about myself. My father.
Do you mean your father?
No, my father.
Yes, father.
My father was King George.
Do you mean George?
No, George.
Yes, George.
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 Who was your father?
My father was King Henry.
Henry.
Yes, I'm King Henry VIII's daughter.
You mean daughter?
Yes, daughter.
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 My father was king during the Second World War.
I was queen during the Spanish War.
The Spanish what?
The Spanish War.
Oh, you mean war?
Yes, war.
Ew. How strange. I had a lovely coronation.
I had a lovely coronation too. Did you go on holiday afterwards?
Yes. Afterwards, we had a holiday in... What's that word? It's on the tip of my tongue.
The tip of your what?
My tongue. What's in my mouth?
Oh, you mean your tongue. In my day, it rhymed with song.
Well, not anymore. Today it rhymes with sung.
I'll give it a try. Tongue. Tongue, 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 tongue. It sounds very strange.
I've noticed that you do pronounce some of your words very strangely.
So do you.
No, I don't. I speak the Queen's English.
I thought I did too.
Well, let's check. How do you say window?
Window.
And wind?
Wind.
And money?
Money.
And love?
Love.
Harry Potter?
Harry Potter.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious?
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
How strange.
Yes, strange.
Well, I must be going. It was a really nice conversation.
Conversation, yes.
I must say, I don't approve of some of your pronunciations.
You don't approve?
No, I don't approve.
Of my pronunciation?
Of your pronunciations.
Well, there's nothing I can do about that.
Nothing at all?
No, nothing at all.
Well, I must be going. I'm a guest at a guest of honor at a feast.
I'm guest of honor at a fest.
All right. I just wanted you to hear a couple of words side by side. Tal, what you got for me? I've got a hand up, right?
It kind of keeps going back in and out. I think it's something wrong with his buttons.
Oh, okay. Now, I will lower your hand. He got catfished. All right. So, I just kind of, oh, yeah, Tal. Feel free to just start talking and interrupt me if you get in. I thought hearing the pronunciation, you can see what's called the great vowel shift, right? I think a lot of the vowel usage actually sounds a lot more like American English than British English now. So in that way, it's easier to understand. And then other times, it sounds like a Northern English person. So, yeah. All right. So I thought it was important just for you to hear sort of that difference and kind of recognize that we're rediscovering new layers to Shakespeare with things like understanding rhyming schemes. Certainly things like there's like a pun about he doesn't have any reasons for it, you know, like why he's leaving his girl. And it's just like, well, he doesn't have any grapes either. And you're just like, okay, crazy person. But when you hear it in original pronunciation, reason sounds like raisins. So raisins are dried grapes, right? So he doesn't have any raisins for it. And it's like, and you don't have any fresh grapes either. So like jokes like that have been lost in the pronunciation we're sort of like rediscovering. But kind of recognizing that Shakespeare, especially the original pronunciation, might even be easier for you to understand than like the fancy Britishified version. So let me grab Ye Olde Culture and Values just to reiterate where we are in the, oh man, this is why I had you get the whole book, not the two halves. I gotta go get part 2 over here. If you ended up with the 2 parts, we're in part 2 now. Or if you got the biggie, you're just in the biggie. All right, so, so last time we really looked at the rest of chapter 13, right? We are in 14 now, and you will see, I mean, that's not helpful. Mine says page like 480, 482 is where we've got English literature, drama in Elizabethan England. That's where you're going to find your William Shakespeare business. So I think it is a very decent section here. And the whole point that I had about not making you like read a piece of Shakespeare in this very short class was because we've got some great excerpts in here of Shakespeare. So we've got like a couple of little excerpts from Henry IV and Romeo and Juliet, a couple of excerpts from Hamlet. There's several sonnets in here. Sonnets are only 14 lines. Okay, cool. If you've got the one with the winged victory on it, it starts on 493. But you've got all kinds of great examples in here. If you want to study a sonnet, you don't have to memorize any piece. It's not like when I have the test question, you're going to have to regurgitate one, but I would study one in our like stuff to look for in poetry, read that section in your book, pick a favorite sonnet. You know, I mean, you took English from me, you know that Sonnet 130, which happens to also be in your book, I was doing a big scan. It's a lot of people's favorites. It's, you know, it's a thing where he's doing a lot there. So, yeah, My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, one of my favorites. Not Marble Nor the Gilded Monument is also one of the big ones, but you can look up Shakespeare sonnets. They're 14 lines each, so it's not like a major investment of time for you to just like read one, read a little bit about it, understand kind of what's going on there. I'm pretty sure they go through what a sonnet is made of, sort of the parts of it. We can talk about that more on Thursday if you've read through this and it doesn't sort of give you enough that you're comfortable with. But yeah, you've got a great section in your book for that, so I'm not gonna make you do more. You know what? We might listen to a little Thomas Tallis on Thursday, just for funsies, just so you can kind of hear what's going on there. But before that, the rest of this chapter 14, you've got just kind of great moments to remind yourself of what's going on here. I've just sort of thumbed through, and we've got Durer's self-portrait in here. I just saw Anne of Cleves flip by Hans Holbein. Hieronymus Bosch is in here. Oh, the Altdorfer Battle of Alexander at Issus. That is a huge one. So Bruegel the Elder, Hieronymus Bosch, Garden. You've got a lot of great pieces that we've looked at in depth in class, and sort of reading the caption and reading a bit of the detail there might help you. There's a whole section on El Greco that's only like 1/3 sections of a page, but I think it's useful to just sort of flip through the chapter, recognize paintings that you recognize and be like, oh, we talked about that. Read the fine print about them. Jacopo Pontormo, he kind of got left in the, I relegated him to the documentary, I'm sorry. We're going to talk more about Titian in a little bit. I feel like, oh my gosh, are we going to have time? Things just really run out. And then I'm going to let you go early tonight. But yeah, you've got this chance to sort of decide on what's your favorite color moment, because the final is going to be a lot more open-ended for you now that you know what's going on. You have the midterm, you know how to do a art criticism piece, you know how to talk about either Dante or the Miller's Tale and tell me some stuff about it. It's not there to catch you out. It's more there that if something was more interesting to you in the lectures or the documentaries, then you get a chance to sort of shine on the stuff that was interesting to you rather than having to memorize exactly the thing that I said. Oh, look, here's the St. Peter's floor plan. Important thing to be taking notes on. Cool. I haven't made fun of Michelangelo's Medici Chapel. So, I mean, we're missing out on some high quality time together, but maybe we can do that for a minute on Thursday. Basically, if you look in your book and you see the Michelangelo's Medici Chapel, why don't we Google it together? Because I am going to let you go here in about 10 minutes. Michelangelo Medici. So that moment of whether or not Michelangelo did autopsies. Yes. Anybody? What do we got going on?
Ms. Watts, so you want us to read about that in the book, the Michelangelo's, you're saying something about Michelangelo, like, do we need to read that in the book? You're saying what you're saying right now?
Yes, I would flip through and at least look at all the captions to all of the pictures in this chapter so that you are up on things, but you will be able to read a little bit more about the Medici Chapel in the book. It's one of the figures right next to the St. Peter's story. I thought I would pull it up here for your entertainment, just so we can have a chance to look at the figures a bit. Michelangelo was a king of sculpture, but all right, so we've got a couple of gentlemen here. You can see that we've got like great anatomy and muscle studies here. I mean, weirdly, I don't think you could be that bulky and still have that much definition, but who am I? Not a personal trainer. The thing that people tend to point out, especially in this Medici Chapel stuff, okay, so that's a lady? Question mark? No, it's a lady. But as you can see, basically, like the musculature, the anatomy, the way that the muscles are lined, those freaking biceps and forearms, that is a sculpture of a young man with two boobs plopped on it poorly, right? So we've got sort of two sculptures of women here by Michelangelo that he gets the faces right. Like these both look like women in the face, but let's all be honest, that's not what a naked lady looks like, to the point where you want to question whether or not he's actually ever seen a naked lady. Because I mean, you can see here you've got like male pectoral musculature being, and then just like a boob plopped on top. So it doesn't at all follow that sort of attention to anatomical detail like the rest of the muscle overlaps do. I mean, look at that bicep. Look at, like, you got the deltoid coming up over there, and then you've got like pectoral, and then like whatever that is. They're way too far apart. They don't follow the musculature. They're not, they are something else. They are a questionable part of Michelangelo's sculpture history, but this is kind of one of those arguments that people have that he perhaps had never seen a naked lady, and or his anatomy lessons did not extend that far, and that maybe he never had a nude female model, that he just used young boys. And it's less evident that he's just using young boys for his female models in paintings because they're clothed. So I just thought I would point that out. You get to see these in the book. Like here is part of that. I think, what is this? Dawn and Dusk. So yeah, this image is in your book, but just kind of the importance of this piece is kind of that study of, clearly his anatomy lessons all came from young men. And that may have also been that if he was doing cadaver autopsies to understand human muscular systems, that male corpses were the only ones that were really available. So that's just a little bit more about like 5 minutes with Michelangelo. Cool. Well, that is all of my meanwhile in the Renaissance, because on Thursday we're going to do the Baroque. Stuff's happening quickly. Any questions for me on any of that? Are we good? I know we kind of went over time last time, and I don't want to deliberately mix periods and epochs. So our Meanwhile in the North has come to a conclusion. We're going to look at Northern Baroque at the same time as Southern Baroque, because things start to like mesh. Like we get this 100 years of doing our own thing, and then they start to mesh. So we'll look at the Baroque across the board on Thursday. All right. Well, have a great couple days, guys. I'm going to, yeah.
Sorry, I just thought of this. So aside from the reading, like the Shakespeare that you said, is there anything else that we're supposed to be doing before Thursday?
Not necessarily before Thursday. I'm going to put up that stuff to look for in poetry slides for you, like right now. And I'm going to put up your discussion board. That's what they're called. Discussion board. But the one that I have for you is on the Baroque. So not really something that you can do now. I have homework for you on Thursday for watching a video without me. We're going to watch one together, and then there's a choice of 3 different ones to watch. I think I'll put those up tonight, and if you want to like get started and watch it because you don't have time, like this weekend or something, that'll be how that goes. So
One of the three
yeah.
or all three?
Just any one of the three. And spoilers on the final, it'll be like, tell me more about one of these three artists, and you'll get to pick the one that you watch the documentary and be like, choo choo. Yeah, so it's not like there's going to be a you picked wrong kind of moment. So yeah, we'll watch one together in class on Thursday after the lecture, and then yeah, so I will get that content up for you now before I go to bed. There's nothing that you need to be doing before Thursday, and yeah, I will see you guys then. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, ma'am. Have a good night.
You too.